Well, hello, and welcome to the show. Every week, whatever. I'm here on Thursdays. You're here on Thursday. Thank you for being here. If you're live, if you're watching this after the fact, come back on Thursdays. We do a live show every week. It's me, usually guests, usually people in the cloud native and container DevOps ecosystem, and we talk about all these tools, methods, stuff related to DevOps, and usually containers, which is kind of my thing. So come back. You're here to ask questions. That's why we love to do this live, so we get your questions. This show then turns into a podcast. 3 or 4 weeks later, all those links are below or above. You can also join the Discord server over there, devops.fan. We've now got over 10,000 DevOps people, at least interested in DevOps, because they're on the server, and a lot of professionals. So we do something every month where people that sign up on Patreon get to show up, and we do sort of a hangout. And if you've been here before, you've heard this spiel. So I have this thing on Patreon where you can join for free. You can just click the little follow button down here. The link's below. And that follow button gets you sort of a weekly email about everything I'm creating, who's going to be on the show, what podcast is releasing, what new open source I've created, course launches and updates, all the things that I'm sharing, giving, and selling on the internet, essentially. So that's just about once a week, no big deal. And if you want to thank me by buying a coffee or joining one of our gratitude givers or high fiver membership plans, you can do that. You get some special benefits in there, and that's the high fivers I was talking about, by the way. We hang out every month. That's coming up, and we get to do a thing in Discord where we just talk about our projects. People bring their code or their infrastructure as code, and we can review it and give opinions or bring topics and questions you have, and we just sort of all hang out. It's a nice small crew. It's usually between 5 and 10 people just talking about their day. And it's DevOps professionals. And if you're in that crowd, please join us. And what else? We've got some great stuff. I'm very excited to talk about these topics today because there's something that I basically install everywhere there's Kubernetes. It's a standard thing for me. So let's welcome to the show. We got Wang and Jesse Suen.
Hi, Brett. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad for you to be here. Okay, so if you don't know who these two gentlemen are, they are the co-creators of the Argo project. And now they're the co-founders of Acuity, a new startup. And let's talk about that real quick. Well, let's get the business stuff out of the way. But this is actually really good news. It's near and dear to my heart because I work with a lot of startups. So you basically are now full-time Argo, starting a company around it, right? Like the different Argo projects. And you were just telling me 10 minutes ago that you announced your funding. So let's talk about that. Who wants to go first?
Oh yeah, so very happy to announce, like we actually announced last Monday. We're talking about we got another 20 million for the Series A, and we got the money from the Lead Edge and Decibel partners. Basically, this is just like 6 months after we got the seed round. I think this is a good validation about our strategy. Means Argo is so popular, people need help, and we want to put in more resources into this open source product. That's basically our investors are believing the mission and believing our execution plan. That's how we can get in such a good financial situation to be able to make the product even better down the road. So yeah, it's very exciting to be able to close it so quickly and actually in such a short period.
Yeah, that's exciting, and I'm sure you've had a lot of sleepless nights lately. It's always great to hear because these announcements that come out, they're always like after all the work. So it's sort of the
you understand it,
yeah. Of course, you have now committed to a whole bunch of work ahead of you. So good luck with that. But so for those out there, like. Let's talk about the relationship real quick of Argo, which maybe a lot of people have heard on the live stream, and Acuity. What's the relationship there? How do they go together?
Jesse, you go ahead.
Yeah. So Argo is a CNCF project, right? So it's not as if we like own the project. It's collaboration with other companies like Intuit and Red Hat, and so this is. Something we've been working on for like 6 years. It started with a previous startup that Hong and I worked at, but Intuit was really kind of just the sponsor of the project throughout the years. But yeah, when we realized is that people just needed help, and there wasn't really a vendor that they could kind of turn to running the various projects, getting support. We would see very frequently on Slack, like how is there any commercial support for this? And so we kind of saw that gap and decided like, yeah, there's enough traction behind this. Let's go start a company dedicated to this project to fulfill that need. So that's where we are today. And yeah, we have a lot of maintainers on the project. We're dedicated to continuing the support around it, as well as building the ecosystem around the Argo project.
Yeah. Well, it's going to kind of become obvious throughout this show, but I'm a pretty big fan. So I can't claim to be a maintainer, but certainly using it and helping other people use it is part of my jam, because I think that we talk a lot about on this show about GitOps and declarative infrastructure and making sure that people understand the fundamentals of that, so that they make good, not just decisions about tooling, but good decisions around their workflows and their processes and their mindset, which has kind of got to come first, right? I always joke about how you can use all these tools the wrong way, and then it's nothing like declarative infrastructure. So can one of you just sort of talk about the origin story a little bit? Because I don't think I know that very well. Like how Argo came about, what was it trying to solve at the time?
Yeah, I can give it a try. Jesse, feel free to add additional colors to that. So we started at a company called Athletics. That was a startup, and we are trying to, I would say, to challenge the status quo of the CI/CD space. Basically, at that time, there are three things that are very popular at getting a momentum. One is Docker container. Second is public cloud. Third is actually microservices. That's why we're thinking, hey, how about we providing a next generation CI/CD system to make it more like future proof? And we actually did a full CI/CD system at Athletics, and I mean, there's a lot of the component in that. It's a little bit giant system, can do everything, but it's also a little bit complicated, I would say.
Right.
During the end of that, I think to be honest, like at that time we bet on the Kubernetes, but the Kubernetes, like about 6 years ago, I would say it's close to mature, but not really mature yet. That's why we have a lot of labor struggle. Like managing the service is not there. That means to be able to run our CI/CD system, we even need to install the Kubernetes cluster for our customers. That's a lot of the burden to bear.
Right.
So you understand that. Basically, at that time, people pay attention to this orchestration like landscape, Docker Swarm was there, like Mesosphere was there, and Kubernetes, they are kind of fighting there.
Yeah.
So we picked the Kubernetes at that time. So in the end, we actually, the original product was like proprietary. Basically, it's like one big giant thing. And later we actually open sourced the version. And later we actually streamed down to be just Argo workflows. That basically is our origin. Original Argo is just referring to Argo workflows. Think about it. Workflow is workflow engine. You can use that for CI, using for data pipeline. But in the end, we just like open source that core engine. And soon after that, before we even be able to building something on top of that engine, Intuit acquired us. So we basically the whole team joined Intuit. And then the story continues there is Intuit, they had this vision. They believe on the container, they believe on the Kubernetes. They asked us to say, hey, has the whole team help us do this cloud migration from the private data center to Kubernetes on AWS. During that process, we figure out more about what is the Intuit deployment pattern. Means they have many cluster, many segment, many compliance requirement. Then we are figuring out what is the gap. Then we say, okay, we need some new deployment tool to be able to deploy multiple cluster, multiple environment. That's how we created Argo CD. And Argo CD basically was created to address exactly the problem we had at Intuit. And later the story repeated for the Argo routes, Argo events. So that's we are so grateful that Intuit is supporting us to do this open source initiative. Basically, they put a lot of resource to make the product better. Well, we are using that internally at Intuit, but we can sharing it with all the community. And I'm so grateful that the community actually did an amazing job to give us the feedback, create issues. Intuit, to be honest, we benefit at that time a lot is make the product much more stable.
Right.
So that's why I think one thing people really like about Argo CD is you can feel that the feature richness. Basically, it has single sign-on, it has alt configuration, has multi-tenancy. It's almost have everything you need out of the box. It's all because like we have this self-niche like mindset at Intuit. Basically, we do it. We just want to make it work. We just want to make it better.
Right. Well, and that's very common too, right? Like if you make an internal tool, it usually just solves that one problem, right? It's not usually a universal toolkit like that. And so it's great that you found that community. And I'm a big user of Intuit running my own little company. I'm
Oh,
a big user of all their products. So it's actually it's always cool to use a day-to-day product and then know, yeah, this thing I'm using is on Kubernetes. Then
exactly.
you can also blame it for every possible problem it has. But you the point is like it's you never know. Like you always hear like, oh, IBM uses, or you hear random companies are using Kubernetes or using Docker, and you know that they're all kind of using it. But it's always great when you hear that validation of like these big companies, traditionally companies that we don't think of as tech companies, even though they really
Yeah.
all are, and we realize, oh well, they're actually the ones that made this really cool this idea around. I think when my first time using it, I was new to GitOps. I was
Mhm.
very interested in the different options. It came out of the box with a web GUI, which at the time it's way more feature rich now, but even at the time I felt like, well, this is actually pretty cool, and didn't really think that it was something I would want to. I didn't realize I needed something like that as a web interface to give to my developers, because I was so used to giving them all Git, like, here's a Git repo, do your things in that, and then the magic happens, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
and even just having that status or the availability, like giving the green and reds, was
Yeah.
a simple thing that I think really stuck with me early on, because I realized I can now give more insight into not just that, okay, their PR was merged of the YAML, but their workloads are actually running in production, and they're not having to look at necessarily all the Kubernetes things. They're just able to look at their workloads. And there's just so much of this project that I'm excited to talk about. So
Yeah.
let's back up a second and make sure that people, okay, so we've talked about Argo workflows, which I didn't realize that was the first product. I'm going to have to use that as like a trivia question. And then I'm going to guess that maybe I'm going to wonder about this origin story here. Did CD happen because people were trying to use workflows to do the CD and you realize it deserved its own product? Or how did the CD itself
Yeah.
spin off as
It
its own thing?
When we were acquired by Intuit, the team was kind of like tasked with two missions. Like one to build a Kubernetes distribution that we would just run our services on, but then also to provide that delivery tool that 4,000 developers would be using to ship to Kubernetes. Um, so that's actually why we are so GUI focused, because we needed it to be user developer friendly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we did evaluate. We tried to find out what was in the uh, ecosystem before we set out to build CD. And because Kubernetes is so configuration heavy, uh, GitOps is a thing because of that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think prior to Kubernetes, it wasn't so as much necessary, but because it's just YAML after YAML, it's natural to just want to store that in Git. Um, so so we knew we wanted to do GitOps. We knew were going to manage many clusters, given the size of Intuit. Um, and no tool existed that could kind of meet our kind of enterprise needs, like single sign-on, the
Yeah.
user experience, and so we decided to build CD. And one lesson actually we learned from Applatix was that our original attempt to build this kind of huge platform was to kind of abstract away Kubernetes and provide our own, here's an application, and like you don't need to worry about the Kubernetes YAML, but here's our YAML, and it's a little simpler.
Yeah.
That didn't actually wasn't well received, because I think when you do that, you tend to hide away the power of Kubernetes. So as features come in, like then you have to create some leaky abstraction that unlocks those underlying features. The other problem is, we had to support our developers, right? And either they're going to come to us and say, like, what's your DSL look like? Can you explain all this? Or we can point them to open source documentation and say, here, like, this is well-known documented stuff, and this is how you can, set up HPA. And
Right.
so that was kind of an intentional decision to almost like teach Kubernetes to our developers rather than kind of hide it away from them. And that's why the resource tree is the way it is because, like, okay, now you can see the relationships between deployments to replica sets of pods. And, when you upgrade, it's actually, creating a new replica set with new set of pods. And that kind of helps, solidify people's understanding of what's going on as you kind of change your YAML around.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that reading YAML documentation or API documentation for YAML isn't exactly a good discovery, like a feature discovery workflow, right? So yeah, I mean, we all, we have these other senses in our bodies other than just looking at text on a screen, and so it's wonderful to sort of discover stuff, because I have exactly that scenario where I discovered things built into Argo through seeing checkboxes on screen that I didn't know what they meant, right? Like this is a thing that I could have put true in YAML, but I didn't read through every layer of the documentation, so I didn't know that. But I'm seeing this button here that, and the specific case I'm thinking of is like the one that basically deletes and reapplies everything. And I didn't realize that was a feature in Argo, and it was this checkbox just staring me in the face. And it's a subtle thing. We all want to pretend we're all hackers and at the command line all day long, every day. But sometimes just seeing it in a different light is actually pretty cool. And so I agree with that, definitely.
Yeah, I have a little bit of insight on that. I want to add to that is based on our understanding, if you guys using Kubernetes, like sometimes people interested in using the whole Kubernetes cluster just deploy one application. We saw that pattern.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe people are doing this multi-tenancy, means they are deploying multiple applications in the multiple namespace. We also see the people actually putting every single microservices into the same namespace. It's like all different patterns we saw, which we found that very interesting to my perspective is in a Kubernetes context, there are only two layers, whether it's a cluster or it's a namespace. But we don't think it's the good a good level of the breakdown about how you share in the context with each other. So that's why Argo CD introduced this application level, which is you can put multiple applications in the same namespace, different namespace, up to you.
Right.
So in the end, every day, your DevOps, your developer, your SRE, they are working around this application context. It's not namespace, not a cluster.
Right.
It's actually most relevant thing. Basically, it's basically getting all the monitor, logging, everything organizing that way. Something happened, you go to the Argo CD, you look at the Argo CD dashboard to see the healthy status, and you also look at the Kubernetes events and the additional information on which pod is crashing and what is Kubernetes events telling you. You can easily, starting from the Argo CD dashboard, to figure out what you need to do.
Yeah.
That greatly reduced the MTTD and MTTR added into it. That's why we found it's extremely useful to have that level of the context to be shared, organized by the application.
Very good. That reminds me of the fact that Argo, when I first used it, I think it was one of the first tools that was sort of natively multi-cluster, and which nowadays it's weird when a tool isn't. And everyone starts with their first cluster, but they don't. It takes a while, I think, especially for teams that are new to Kubernetes, to sort of figure out their model for how many clusters are we going to have? Where are those clusters? And it's nice to see tools that can kind of grow with them without redesigning that architecture as well. I've been able to use it just in the last year, actually, Argo with single sign-on, and I didn't get to configure it, but I certainly used it and was pleasantly surprised that it worked fine out of the box, never had an issue. So for those that are maybe new to this stuff, so we're talking about Argo CD, and that's mostly focused on deployments, right? And when we talk about GitOps, I know we didn't define GitOps, but just go Google it real quick instead of us talking about what GitOps is. But it's a part of the trend of infrastructure as code design, and it's maybe a very specific one, but it's something that, at least in my opinion, if you're deploying Kubernetes, you're probably going to use Argo, or it's one of your contenders. And for me and my customers, clients, whatever, like they all have Argo. Like every cluster they have either has Argo in it, or Argo is controlling it or deploying to it. I'm not as familiar with the other products. So can we talk real quick of an overview? We mentioned workflows, so that was the first one. What else we got there?
So then probably the next one to talk about would be rollouts. Do we have the fourth one, Argo events? I tightly couple events with workflows. So really quick, Argo events is a eventing framework its use case was to trigger workflows based on events. So maybe you upload something to S3, and then as soon as that gets uploaded, you want to process it with a workflow. And that was kind of the main use case, or you can do like a webhook or a git commit, and then that will trigger another workflow. So that people who use events are almost always kind of coupling it with workflows. I tend to group them together. The rollouts is interesting because, by the way, all of these projects you can use standalone. So it was intentional that users could kind of pick what they really needed. We have a lot of people who actually use rollouts, but then they have their own kind of delivery mechanism. And rollouts is a progressive delivery operator. Think canary deployments, blue-green deployments. But what it also does is it does what they call progressive delivery, which you can think of like as an evolution of just continuous delivery. Progressive delivery is the ability to automate the promotion or rollback or abort the roll update based on metrics. So as you're updating your rollout, we can query your metric provider like Datadog or Prometheus and analyze and making sure it meets certain KPIs. And if it starts failing those KPIs, a rollout can automatically abort and go back to what we marked as the stable version. And this was born out of just like a necessity because Kubernetes, as you may or may not know, they don't have like a blue-green mechanism or a canarying mechanism. Everything is just rolling update and like try to get from point A to point B as fast as possible, but there's no kind of guardrails to kind of automatically stop it somewhere in between. I mean, you do have pod readiness gates, but that is kind of like a very poor man's kind of progressive delivery, I guess you can say.
Right, that's a good point, and that's definitely not. I mean, a lot of these things aren't looking at additional metrics, and having a single readiness check or whatever can be for, especially once your team gets on board with a lot of this stuff. You know, I'm always with companies working when they're at the beginning of all this stuff, and they're thinking, "What? We need a health check?" You know, so they create the first one, and then it's like eventually it seems like they mature. They start building in metrics endpoints to everything, and that's where it suddenly they realize, okay, well, which one of these metric endpoints should be our health check validator, and I love that there's more intelligence built into the rollouts for that you can, once you get advanced as a human team, your technology can follow you instead of it just being limited to the built-in Kubernetes stuff.
So regarding the routes, I think it's a different granularity regarding the like normal health check, which provided natively by Kubernetes, because that is normally we are talking about a readiness probe or liveness probe normally. So in this case, we actually, as Jesse has mentioned, it's a metrics provider. But one additional story on top of that is actually, if you know, all the big organizations are paying great money for the observability tools. We are talking about Splunk, Datadog. We are talking about millions of dollars. But most of the time, we always have this instant always happen around when you just release a new version. I think more than half of the cases, you release something is broken. But the people, what happens next is you are going to look at Splunk, you are looking at the Datadog to figure out what's going on. But until then, you figure out something happened, and then you roll back. Maybe that happened. So what the rollouts really plays a role is it creates that feedback loop directly. Means something happened, you have this golden metrics in place. Something happened, rollouts will not even go to 100% traffic. It will actually roll back to the previous version. So you got more time to troubleshoot. You still know something went wrong, but the exposure is minimized. Means it's just like 20-30% of traffic, you got that golden signal and you roll back automatically. That, as I keep seeing this MTTR and MTTD because I was the Argo team manager. So we are talking about what we are really solving, what is really our ROI there.
Right.
So we are trying to using rollouts to basically increase the operational excellence to the next level.
Right. And giving confidence to those developers that merge the PR and then are now deploying it. They know that, well, worst case worst case is that maybe just affected a little bit of everyone instead of everyone. And there's always this lag between you deployed and you're waiting for information on, like, did this actually work? And it's like you're saying, it comes from all these different places, right? Obviously, we have metrics and logging systems. You've got customers. You're sometimes with some of these bigger rollouts, you have like your customer, the whole help desk or whatever you want to call it nowadays for internal or external customers. You're on the phone with them. You're waiting for calls. You've got people. It's one of those things where no matter how much stuff we put in the system, there's always that human element of updates and rollouts, at least with companies that aren't Netflix and GitHub, that aren't the bleeding tip of the spear, sort of bleeding edge teams.
Yeah.
And so having this ability to just say, hey, let's just try 10% for now or whatever, and that I feel like gives almost adds a little bit of courage to the teams to say, well, look, we did all of our automated testing. We're fine with shipping this on Friday with that rollback. So the projects can be used independently. These are all Kubernetes focused, right? We're strictly Kubernetes as the control plane. Okay. Right. And then come along Acuity. So how does the company itself affect these? Obviously, you talked about continuing the open source work, making them better inside the CNCF and all that. But sounds like there's something else coming here. So
yeah. So a lot of feedback that we've seen is that people just don't want to run it themselves. So the thing that we're starting with is fully managed Argo CD. Basically, we will run Argo CD for you, but this is, we haven't really talked too much about this, but we actually, based on our learnings at Intuit and actually operating Argo CD at scale for like close to 500 clusters at one point, we see firsthand like some of the scaling considerations, and we've given talks on like how to fine tune Argo to kind of as you grow your clusters, because you can hit limitations. Our cloud solution we tweaked it a bit to have this new architecture, and this is something new that we'll describe it in more detail down the road, but we've taken a hybrid approach where you can install part of the Argo components on your managed clusters, because normally Argo CD is you have a full control plane and it talks to the Kubernetes API server and you have to expose that Kubernetes API server in order for Argo CD to manage it. So that has some security implications. If you want to run private clusters, and Argo CD is maybe a hard sell, because that means your managed cluster has to be open, to expose your API server needs to expose.
Right.
So what we've actually done with our cloud is that we can run the control plane piece, the server piece, but then the controller piece actually can run on the managed cluster. And that thing, so now you can have a fully private cluster. And then when Argo CD actually needs to talk to or do things like look at logs and stuff, it will do through an agent that we install in the managed cluster in order to fulfill those things like getting logs and looking at live objects and stuff. So this has a couple of benefits. Like, it'll be a lot more scalable because we distributed out the work of the controller to all the clusters. There's some security benefits as well, where you can run private clusters now, and yeah. So and we fully manage the whole lifecycle. So you can click a button and it will deploy a new instance in minutes, and you can be up and running with a nice UI to just manage your instances.
Very nice. Yeah, and that's part of the challenge too for a lot of this is I regularly have conversations with infrastructure teams, or even people that aren't really a dedicated infrastructure team that are running infrastructure. And I'm always trying to push them to software as a service as much as possible, just because a lot of us, especially infrastructure nerds that just love all these tools and managing all the systems and having the control, we get lost in the idea that we're too busy managing the infrastructure to service the business teams. And so I look at the developers. If I'm more of a ops focused team, I'm looking at the developer teams. If that's how you've designed your teams, I'm looking at them as a customer. I'm looking at the business units, the project managers, all those as customers. And if I'm too busy managing deployment solutions or CI solutions or logging and monitoring solutions, so I always go sort of like, my top-down approach is usually say, okay, first, you shouldn't be running your own image registry. Like, that's been done. Like, there's 1,000 companies that do it. You can buy a product, but don't do it yourself. Like, don't make a homebrew solution. Like, none of us have free time. Nobody's got a day off that they can just fill with all this new infrastructure tooling. So I'm always trying to recommend to people, look, you'll be much more agile. You're already adopting all these new things. So you're going to be much more ready for what the developers throw at you if you outsource this stuff to SaaS. So I tend to be a big fan of whatever our favorite tool of the day is, like Argo CD. Now it's a SaaS. Okay, let's just do that. Like, why run it yourself? Usually the team, it's much more expensive to hire an additional DevOps engineer to manage all that infrastructure than it is to just outsource the SaaS. So I'm excited to see this. And it sounds like there's a beta. People can sign up on Acuity's website.
It's in closed beta currently. So we're it's pretty early, and we're trying to get feedback from our users that are using it before we kind of open it up. But right now you can join our waitlist, and if you're interested in joining, we should be able to open to closed betas waitlist very soon.
Yeah, cool. I definitely know how that goes. It's a wait and see. And that's exciting because some teams maybe are new now, like they're just getting into their Kubernetes clusters, or they have Kubernetes, but they're not yet adopting a GitOps style deployment, which is, in my opinion, the only way to roll nowadays. We actually have some questions. I'm going to throw you all really quick, a few related. A great question from Jai Kumar: how do I get started with Argo and GitOps? Any docs to follow them? So they just Google it?
I would say the Getting Started guide on Argo CD is a good place. We already have a pre-provisioned example apps repository that is kind of filled with different examples. Like if Helm is your if you like Helm, there's an example Helm chart. Otherwise, if you just like customize, there's a customized example. And so it's just the standard kind of Kubernetes guestbook app that everyone may have seen. And then there's step-by-step things to just like add that repo to Argo CD, and then deploy. You can deploy in the same cluster that Argo CD is running in. And it kind of just walks you through that. Getting started.
From the Acuity website, if you go to the resource, we actually recently has Argo CD 101, learn the basics of Argo CD and GitOps. So it's using the GitHub action together with Argo CD to give you a very end-to-end practical workshop. So you can just follow that video. I think you will see the power. I mean, it's a little bit basic, but you will have a full CI/CD with Argo CD, like I would say in 30 to 40 minutes, you will see the power of it.
Yeah. I've always felt like Argo CD was, especially at your first learning experience, it's pretty easy to get going. And when you get to that point where you're like, I want Argo to be deployed declaratively, I'm in the middle of a project now where we're doing sealed secrets plus Argo on Kubernetes. And the team is brand new to all those tools. Actually, they're a team brand new to Kubernetes within the last year. And there's not a lot of stumbling blocks. At first they're maybe trying to figure out how do we get a secret when we don't have a secret, and then we sort of dive into the sealed secret stuff, or and they're using GitHub Actions in their case, but it kind of just plug and play, if that's still a term we use 30 years later. I'm a fan.
I would say in a way like why we want to start Acuity, and also in that sense is we still feel the Kubernetes is still complicated. Recently, I see someone post on LinkedIn for a very interesting diagram. Basically, hey, you decided to use Kubernetes. What's the next thing? Are you using GitOps? No. Oh, yes. Yes. Then Argo CD. Then yes. What is secret management tool? Yes. Then what is? Are you using routes? Yes. Then what is the service mesh solution?
Right.
Basically, it's a maze still.
Yeah.
That's from Acuity. We are trying to make those decision or experience to be much easier. So we are going to expanding our feature set. Basically, it not means we can be solving all the problem. That's too too aggressive, but it's
Right.
more about for maybe for 70 to 80% of the people for their relatively easy path, we can providing a paved road that you don't need making these hard decisions, and you can rely on us to getting that end-to-end experience. That kind of like one big vision we are trying to get to.
Nice. That so do we have I didn't actually look at the release cycle recently, and is this something where you all expect to release more often, or is it just sort of like big feature work? Because it's one of those things where I look at Argo CD today and I'm thinking, okay, well, I don't. What's next? Are we done? Is it solved the problems?
Oh, that's a good question. So so Argo CD is in a 3-month release cycle. So it basically every 3 months we just ship, or if things don't make it, then they don't make it. But it's a good question, because if you look at some of our recent talks, the next thing we want to do on Argo CD is actually provide more extension points to it. So and by what I mean by that is that Argo CD, you can see just native Kubernetes stuff like just fine. But one of the use cases we had, like, and initially we run basically rollouts as kind of the standard kind of thing to replace the deployments, because it's a superset of the deployment capabilities. But there's a lot more information about a rollout, and then I can maybe share, the dashboard that we built for this. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, let's check it out.
Let me know if you can see it.
Probably need to zoom in a little.
Okay, so this is just your normal Argo CD application view, but the first thing when I talk about extensions, so you actually can look at this is something that is different. Like, not unless you install the extension, you wouldn't have this view. And this is kind of showing you specifics about a rollout. So a rollout has a strategy. It has, if it's a canary strategy, it has a list of steps that you want to execute through. This whole view is a UI component that is deployed at runtime, meaning it's not compiled or baked into the product. It's actually, you configure it after you installed Argo CD. And this is just a kind of our flagship extension that we built, but we want to do more, right? Like there's all kinds of other Kubernetes resources that deserve like some visualization other than just staring at YAML. So that's a direction that we really are excited about. Like we're trying to encourage the community, right, to help build these extensions, and they're really just React components that get loaded at runtime. So and we have some like example thing for people to get started to build their own extensions. This is one, I guess, a starting point. But I think in the future, I would love to see kind of more extensions down on the left pane, like sidebar extensions, right? Or things like where, okay, I'm at this view. How can I want to maybe go to my Splunk logs for this whole application? So things like deep linking into, a custom URL that the admin configures for specific to their environment. That's another way we can extend Argo CD to kind of fit more with the infrastructure or the environment.
Yeah, because it's hard to get a single pane of glass that gives everyone all the tools all in one place. So at some point, it's always like, this is yellow or red. I don't understand why. So it's if it's not just image pull back off, if it's something else,
Right.
then I usually have to do a little bit more investigation to figure out what I did wrong. And assuming everyone out there is linting and doing all the things to make sure that you don't deploy bad YAML. So we've got some questions from the audience that are a little more basic. So I would love to get those in here. We've got Sheer asking about, as far as I've heard, GitOps is already considered a DevOps best practice, right?
Yeah. I believe it is the case. As I answered also in the chat, is actually, if you are using Kubernetes, I think that is the no-brainer, the best de facto choice. I think it's all rooted back to this declarative approach about the Kubernetes. So we actually, in a way, I'm more believing that API layer, means that declarative approach as the most valuable thing the Kubernetes bring into the community. But regarding what underlying like other things, actually, that can still evolve on its own. But this is kind of like, to me, is the revolutionary, like the innovation part.
Yeah.
Is you can, using YAML, you like or hate it, but it's still YAML, that can describe the fully about your infrastructure. So we are talking about ingress, application, how many replicas, what CPU memory, or even what kind of instance you want to run. That kind of like making the whole, I would say the declarative, basically, you can thinking about you writing the code, you getting the input output declarative, right? Basically, then you can writing the code, which is a YAML checked into the repository, you getting what you want to describe the infrastructure behavior. So that is the most, I would say, the innovative part. That's why making the GitOps is a no-brainer choice, especially when you're using Kubernetes at this stage.
Yeah, and I honestly think that, I've done it other ways. Like before we had these wonderful GitOps tools, early days of all these orchestrators and whatnot, it was always like, okay, great, we created the YAML to describe our application to go on the servers, but how do we get that YAML to the server and know that it worked when I did it, and it's not a human typing in special commands? And so people I think people that throw shade on YAML, I think forget that if we were doing this same level of automation and intelligence before, you were probably talking about thousands of lines of Chef or Puppet or some other infrastructure tooling that usually one or two people knew. And it usually wasn't the developers. It was usually some other team. And so it was this black box of, okay, now we have a developer that's got a PR ready. They're merging it. We're ready to deploy. We need this other team to do their black magic to just get it out there in the systems. And I think it's easy for us to forget where we came from, but trust me, people, YAML is the best we've got yet. I mean, it's not 100 years from now, we're probably not still going to be using YAML, but until the next thing, I still feel like this GitOps approach, like you're saying, when I do anything else outside of Kubernetes, and I'm not using a GitOps approach with that tool, because GitOps kind of, I feel like, started with Kubernetes because we had that, like you're saying, a declarative API. It just kind of sucks. It feels like I'm stepping back in technology evolution when I'm doing that. I used to be a big Swarm fan. I still sell Swarm training, but that was one of the things where it lacked. It never, one of the things when it was we're getting less popular in the ecosystem, there wasn't the passion around making it GitOps friendly, and it also kind of lacked an API to do so. And that's one of like my sad disappointments around that orchestrator was, it was simple. But once we understood the nature of infrastructure as code, and then we understood how to deploy with sort of an infrastructure as code approach in GitOps, it just seemed like, okay, well, that's now the reason I've got to have Kubernetes. It's almost like that was the shift for me, GitOps at least, was that I need to mature away from Swarm to Kubernetes, because now I have this fantastic methodology for deploying that my developers understand, that they know how to edit the YAML and describe their application like you're talking about. Your application design it's very short compared to all the manifests that you have to describe in your app in Kubernetes. So I really appreciate that approach. And for those that haven't tried it yet, I strongly urge you to give GitOps tools like Argo CD a try, because I think that I have never seen someone back out of it. Like any team that deploys something like Argo CD, they're in it to win it. They're doing Argo the whole time. They're doubling down on it, adding it to more of their systems rather than saying, yeah, this GitOps thing doesn't work. I've never seen someone say that. So I don't know if you ever have that story, but it's like 100% success rate on deployment at least.
Yeah, and I relate to going back to kind of legacy tooling. So like we're figuring out like our tooling to provision our infrastructure, right? And then you have CloudFormation and Terraform, and then so what we're doing is I was like, okay, let's give Crossplane a try, because then I could use Argo CD to deploy our infrastructure, and I tried CloudFormation and the thing on top of it, like CDK, which is supposed to make CloudFormation more
not suck
like code, but you're still running these playbooks that are taking like half an hour to kind of run end to end, even if you just want to make this small little configuration change in the like last part of the formation template. And
right,
it's like and yeah, Crossplane was really refreshing, because like if you make that one small change, like only that one reconciler will make that thing. Everything else kind of just is already reached its desired state. And so I like Hong said, Kubernetes is not just for running pods and your workloads. It's actually a control plane for other stuff. And I think we're going to see more and more this in the future.
Yeah, I think everyone's catching on. I think there's enough success happening and enough problem solving with these tools that, I mean, previously, I don't think before we had Argo and Flux and other tools like it, I don't know that I would ever walk into two shops that deployed the same way with the same tools. Like it was everything was bespoke, unique configuration. They might be using Jenkins and they're SSHing into the server and doing a kube control apply and then a kube control rollout status and like doing all these things. And they had custom scripts. And like you're saying, like someone might have Terraform that does some things. Other shops just sort of kube control apply and pray sort of approach. And I love that I can now, I mean, we're getting closer and closer to this way of walking into a team room. They're a dev-oriented shop. They're making their own software, and that the predictable tooling and the predictable workflow is there, and we can all stop fussing about it and creating unique set. We don't need another project, in my opinion, for how to deploy YAML on Kubernetes. I think at one point someone at Docker counted 100 different projects on all the different ways to deploy your application, and I think we're done with that generation of ideas, and I feel like we've got some winners here, which is why you're getting seed money and A round and all that stuff. More questions.
If you don't mind, I want expanding on that CD side a little bit. So I did observe this trend is before Argo CD or before Kubernetes, when we talking about things, always talking about CI CD together, like Jenkins. You're thinking about Jenkins is the CI CD solution. But what you're doing is in the CI step, you build a Docker image. In the CD side, as you mentioned, you may SSH into a VM to do something, or maybe you are running some kubectl apply in the Jenkins script, trying to deploy the thing. I think with Argo CD, it's fundamentally changed. Basically, it's kind of like pushing the Jenkins to be, hey, just do the CI part. Forget about the CD part. And the CD is more than just CD. Because original concept about CI/CD, I think everyone gets the feeling is the CI/CD is a job. Basically, you deploy it, and that deployment process is done. You consider your CI/CD process is done, right? But with our Kubernetes, with Argo CD, is actually CD is actually more extended. We are talking about day 0, day 1, day 2. Maybe day 0, you got Argo CD to sync your application, but there will be the day 1, day 2, day 3, because your infrastructure keep changing. It could be scaling up, scaling down. It could be reacting some events, so the whole application is changing a little bit due to the traffic. So those things we think is actually Argo CD and give you the visibility and also kind of like expanding that CD view and landscapes there. So CD is not about you deploying it once, forget about it. It's about you deploying and you continuously monitoring and understanding what you have deployed and what is the current status of it.
I always wish that AWS did that back in the day. Like we would have that the stealth ops, something coming into the web GUI and changing something after we deployed Terraform or CloudFormation or whatever, and we didn't know it. And I like to tell this little tale of 1 year at a video company that ends in flicks. I was on a project that managed one of their websites, and we accidentally took it down because of that exact scenario. We were deploying with automation.
Yeah.
Someone, maybe me, maybe not someone else, changed a setting in the web GUI, and then when we redeployed the automation, it broke stuff because we didn't realize there was drift, and then the website went down on a day where Netflix happened to be at number 1 on Reddit for the particular announcement or whatever, and their blog went down. So anyway, don't do it, people. stick to something like, and that's what I love the remediation of these tools and letting me know about drift or just even being aware that drift happened is so valuable. I think, especially as your teams grow and when you have deployments every hour and things are just happening constantly and there's constant change, it's really hard to tell what is being changed out of band, I guess. And I appreciate that. That's sort of baked into these things where it's looking at both sides. And I think for people listening too, like if they're not into GitOps, it's not just infrastructure, it's code. And if you go back on this channel, we've probably talked about GitOps once a quarter for the last 2 years because it's to me, it's worth getting the community and the ecosystem really to commit to this being the way we deploy to Kubernetes. Because if we standardized on containers, yay, problem solved. We standardized on API-driven clusters, yay, and now we're standardizing on the deployment methodology and how that workflow. And I feel like if we as an industry, if we really mature that, like you're doing, we can all go to solve the next problem, whatever that is, because there's always going to be another problem.
So if you see the Argo CD, like I want to share an additional view. There is, I know people are talking about the Kubernetes dashboard, but that project kind of like being there and no one actually actively using it anymore. So because it doesn't providing the granularity, which I just mentioned before, is people don't really care about namespace. People not really just directly care about the cluster. They care about their application. So Argo CD basically are serving that role. If you guys didn't feel that directly, but Argo CD currently is actually the Kubernetes dashboard for you, because that is one GUI you go to in the day-to-day or other day to look at your application. Indirectly, you are looking at the Kubernetes, how it will behave. So that is something.
That's a good point. Yeah, because the Kubernetes dashboard itself is really just looking at raw resources. And it's up to you to understand their relationships, to understand. And in your case, you all are adding additional resources, right? Like the application kind is your API model. So you're adding to me. And if we go way back in time to like 6-7 years ago when a lot of the founders of the Kubernetes project, their intention was actually that this exact scenario would happen because they never intended for that original raw resource API to be the exact method that developers deploy their applications. They always assumed there would be this other layer on top of Kubernetes that was more application or project specific, and that's exactly what you're doing. And I always felt like the raw resources, which is what I always tend to teach first in my courses, I always try to talk about that this is not the final thing that you will be using. But you do need to understand these principles, just like we all need to understand IP addresses, but we are normally using DNS names. We also have these raw resources in our infrastructure, but that doesn't mean those are the ones you're controlling directly or looking at for status. And so that's a great point, because I think when you write that, if you go in just the Argo CD web interface and you do it that way, it may not be obvious to some of those doing this. They don't maybe realize that in the background, at least my understanding is, that's adding resources that are your resources, which are another resource abstraction, an abstraction layer on top. Does that sound correct? Am I describing it correctly?
Exactly. Under the covers, it's a new custom resource definition, CRD, that it started really simple. It basically tell us the source of your manifest and tell us the destination of where you want these to go. And and the source was just like a folder inside the Git repository, and we'll just like recurse that directory and discover all the YAML, and then we'll apply it, kubectl to apply it to the destination. But that is
Right.
it's a full-fledged custom resources, and a lot of our users actually don't prefer to use the Argo CD UI to manage their applications. They actually they're all in on more declarative, even for their Argo CD applications, and that's perfectly fine. Like there's that's actually like we make a point to support that mode of use. And so now what people are doing is GitOpsing and checking in their application specs in their Git repos. And they create like like just one parent app that kind of deploys all the child applications.
Right.
And there are alternatives to that, but like there's something called the application set controller, which automatically generates applications based on like that thing can walk through a Git repo, and it's like, oh, I should create an app for this, I should create an app for that, or it can look at all your clusters registered to Argo CD and say, okay, for every cluster that's attached to Argo CD, create a Prometheus operator application for that. That's we're getting into kind of more the next level advanced kind of people who have been past the guestbook stage, and like they need to create
right.
hundreds of these things. And it's great for, like, we used it to manage a lot of our add-ons to hundreds of clusters into it, and that's when you start to need some automation to create and generate your applications.
Right.
Yeah, I think Brad, you mentioned one thing at the starting is most of your friends, you see the cluster is running Argo CD there or connected to Argo CD, managed by Argo CD. Basically, that's what Jesse mentioned, is we see this trend is Argo CD is the very first thing you connect or you install when you get a brand new managed cluster from the cloud providers. Because you are not using Argo CD just like deploying the guestbook like applications. You're also deploying the add-on. You're using Argo CD to install cluster add-on. A cluster autoscaler is still like whatever you need to a carpenter, a crossplane, whatever you need actually to that cluster. So Argo CD becoming actually more crucial than just like, hey, day-to-day basis. It has two groups of applications. One group is we call it the system applications. You still need to mention their versions. Basically, you need to maintain it. You got a new Kubernetes version. Maybe you need a new version of the cluster or the scaler or cert manager, right? That is system application. Then you have this like daily possible change to the application. Is you are doing development, you got a new Docker image, you want to release a new version out. So that basically Argo CD are doing both. Argo CD is not just like on one side, it's actually doing both sides nowadays.
I'm glad you said that, because that's how I've been recommending it. Is it is becoming one of the very first things, if not the first thing. I do, when I'm using sealed secrets, which I'm kind of a fan of that, it becomes the cart or the horse scenario a little bit with the two of them. So I'm never really sure which one to do. But this is a great point. Okay, the questions are flooding in. I know we're at the hour, so I want to make sure we get some of these good questions in. Let's see if we can do some rapid fire real quick. What is the difference between Argo CD and Argo CD HPA? I don't know what.
Oh,
HPA.
yeah. There's HA probably.
Oh, HA. Okay.
Yeah. They're the same thing. It's basically we up the replicas for the HA, and we mainly the biggest difference is we switched from single node Redis to 3-node Redis cluster, and that's important because when you upgrade Argo CD, Redis, by the way, you can blow it away. It's not like a critical thing. It will rebuild the cache and everything. But then if you want some continuity, and your app tree might like kind of disappear with the single node, it's because Redis lost its. We don't back it with a volume, and it has to rebuild the cache. So Redis HA will let you upgrade Argo CD or survive a node reboot, and your data's just still there. It doesn't have to rebuild the cache.
Yeah, and I honestly, for a lot of the teams I work with, when we start out, we don't do the HA, because to me it's a back end service. It's like, especially the web interface. If it goes down for a minute or two, it comes back up when another pod comes up. So that's interesting. I've never actually had to do an HA deployment yet. So that's a great question. Next question, real quick. Um, what is the max scale apps to Kubernetes cluster count, which is qualified with single Argo CD instance? So I guess like are there scale numbers with Argo?
Yeah, there's been some talk. I think TikTok had one of the biggest installations I've seen. I I think, and I want to say like they have like thousands
Two,
of
three,
applications
Yeah.
three thousand
for a single
applications.
Argo CD. Do you know the numbers?
Yeah, it's about 3,000 applications per single Argo CD, and it's about 100 Kubernetes cluster to be connected.
Yeah,
So
but
just FYI, Jesse just finished a KubeCon talk like last week with TikTok team to talking about the scalability which they have. So
yeah.
if you guys are really into this topic, I think you might be able to finding that on the YouTube now. So it's pretty fresh. Like literally, it just happened last week.
Yeah, that's a good question. I forgot the date that they were going to start releasing them on YouTube.
But yeah, so there's different scale characteristics. There's like application, like number of applications, and that's also the number of clusters as a different thing. How many repositories you might be attaching? Like you might need to scale out the repository servers. So application is the I guess the easier one. Where you start to hit more issues is when you actually start to manage many clusters. So I mean, we did literally have one Argo CD that was just attached to like 400 clusters into it, and it was installing. But we had to use the sharding feature in the controller to kind of have like a handful of controllers to support that many hundreds of clusters.
Right. Right. By the way, while we still have people here, I forgot. I'm going to make sure we mention ArgoCon, September. So we've got some months. We'll be getting the word out. But you're going to do a in real life conference here in Mountain View.
Yeah, will be a physical conference. It's our second ArgoCon. Like we did the last one last December, and this will be second one. We do want you guys can be physically to be here. That'll be great. We can hang out together. There will be a great talks. And just want to call it out. If you have some great ideas, you want to submit the idea. Actually, it's going to be due next week for the CFP. So definitely recommend you guys if you're already using Argo, has a great use case, has a greater insight, or even some critics. Basically, if you something you really hate, that's fine. Just coming to submit a talk. We are willing to hear and we are willing to like social with you guys.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Jose's got a real quick question. Basically, is it a good practice to deploy all the Argo products together?
I can take that. I can take that. I would intend to say no. Don't do it for do it. Basically, you need to find your use case to see whether you need all of them together. Like the full product are actually all solving quite a different problem. We see a lot of teams are using two of them, three of them, but normally not four of them. Depends on what you need. Like if you are using the Argo workflow for the CI, then you need thinking about what's the problem you're trying to solve. Normally, Argo CD and Argo ROS is pretty easy to start it. And for the workflow and events, it depends on use case. So I know the people are using workflow and events for the ETL, for the data processing. They basically use that to replace the Airflow. Maybe that's the main reason they want to do it. So I would say is don't install it for the purpose, just install it to run it. And in the end, it's driven by your use case.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. This is an interesting one. I know Argo CD is more focused on Kubernetes, but can Argo CD help me check my infrastructure as code created on Terraform?
Yeah. So it's a good question. So there's actually quite a bit of Terraform like operators. I think I was actually I counted at least 4 or 5 different Kubernetes operators that are dedicated for actually just provisioning Terraform. Like actually HashiCorp has their own Terraform operator. So the answer to that question is like Argo CD can just deploy any kind of Kubernetes YAML or custom resource. and present that in the UI, and also show this child manifest. So it can show you what the CR shows you, and you can see the status of like that. But at that point, it's up to the underlying operator to provide enough information in the details, like the status of those sub resources, to know if you can, like, is my thing healthy?
Right.
Now, the cool thing that you can do next is that Argo CD has something called health checks. So out of the box, we understand the health of all the native Kubernetes clients. So a deployment is healthy when its desired replicas is equal to its available replicas is equal to the, and they're all updated. So, but for these other operators, if there is information in the status, you can actually write a small Lua script, like a little snippet of code that evaluates the status of that resource and say, okay, if status equals healthy, then show a little green heart in Argo CD. Otherwise, if it's whatever their underlying YAML shows, so you can write code to surface that information in the UI.
That's actually really cool. I would have actually thought the answer was no, but it's now that you pointed out, it's like, okay, yeah, if I'm using kind of like crossplane, right? Like if I'm using Kubernetes as my deployment engine, my differencing engine for my infrastructure, and I'm using a third-party operator, so now Kubernetes is smarter, Argo can also deploy that YAML because it's all just YAML, and that actually is an interesting use case that I've not tried. I'm gonna have to look more into that. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and so Google has something called Google Cloud Connector, which is CRs for basically all of GCP's resources. Like you can provision a database using Google Cloud Connector, and we've gotten contributions for various, not all, because there's like hundreds of these things, but a lot of the more popular ones, people have submitted the health assessments into our upstream. So there's like a resource customizations directory in the Argo CD project, and you'll see some people have already contributed the health checks for some of the more popular resources that are being used. But you can always define them in your own environment as well. You don't have to get it upstream to do it. You can write it in your config map.
Right. For Alexander, I'm actually answering your question in chat, asking about similar questions to earlier about quickly Argo CD setup. The website has a link to documentation, and it takes you right to the overview that has a walkthrough. That's exactly how I use it to get started with Argo. So that's definitely the way to go. Can I deploy all Argo CD configurations declarative? Mario asks.
Yes. So like I mentioned a little earlier, there's many people who want to GitOps everything, including their application spec. We have app projects. Projects is a tenancy unit that it was built as a tenancy unit. So like you basically can operator can scope the level of namespaces that a team has access to, as well as the clusters that they should have access to. That's also a custom resource that you can manage declaratively. Even the Argo CD config map and the RBAC configuration are just config maps that you can do. So actually, the first thing I recommend, after you install Argo CD into a cluster using kubectl to apply, like you should immediately turn around and GitOps the thing you just applied into in a Git repo, and then create an application such that Argo CD is actually managing itself. And then from then on, you're actually making changes to Argo CD through Git practices.
Okay. A similar question to before. CDOT is asking, is there any way for me to use something? Is there something like Argo or similar that I can use on my pre-Kubernetes systems? And if I had to answer this question, I was going to say, well, what we just talked about was, first you're going to make a Kubernetes cluster, put Argo on it, and then presumably your old infrastructure would be more Terraform based, which means a Terraform operator, and then use Argo to deploy your Terraform, which would then control your infrastructure. That's a guess. Is there any other?
Right. I
Yeah.
think the short answer is that we can only manage Kubernetes stuff. So
Right.
in order to manage all legacy infrastructure, there has to exist some operator, whether that's Crossplane or some um, Terraform operator to operate the other stuff. And if you have something that exists like that, then yes, then Argo CD can show and deploy that stuff.
Yeah, it's actually a
Yeah.
great question, C. Dot. Sorry, go ahead, Hong.
Oh, no, I'm just thinking for managing the system, I think for the legacy system, it's hard to getting that similar experience as Kubernetes for sure. But if you're just talking about the deployment part, I know the Spinnaker is always there. It doesn't provide in the same level, like I would say, because it's not declarative and other things, it's just
Right.
not providing the same level, but Spinnaker is still there. People can use for the legacy system. Uh, but we take the feedback from our field is it's hard to justify whether it's a future proof investment. Basically, you are still running a big Spinnaker instance to manage it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, back in the day, I was a Salt Stack fan while
Mm.
back, and when I think about sort of automating and managing old non-Kubernetes infrastructure, if a lot of us are I feel like the answer is to now deploy Kubernetes in a new thing, and then use Kubernetes, whether it's Crossplane or Argo plus operators or whatever, to manage that legacy infrastructure. Maybe we're not near as mature there, and it starts to get pretty complex because now you're talking about all these different levels of things just to manage what you used to do with Chef or Puppet. But it feels like that's maybe what we're all trying to get to, is a world where the Kubernetes is the differencing engine. The Kubernetes is always running, so it's acting like a service or a server that's monitoring infrastructure for change. Back in the day, we would all have to run Spinnaker or these other things as services, like SaltStack. We had to have like the main SaltStack server, and they were doing what Kubernetes is actually designed to do, which is monitor what's running, monitor what you've asked me to run, and then make sure that they're the same. Essentially, maybe you don't need the most advanced Kubernetes deployment to do that. It could probably be a pretty simple one, especially if no one is going to complain if one of your servers doesn't get updated automatically or whatever. Sometimes infrastructure stuff doesn't always get the best high availability because we're all focused on that for our applications in front of users. Anyway, it's an interesting question because as an infrastructure person, I'm always looking to help people automate, remediate and their infrastructure, and we can't all just suddenly go Kubernetes today. So we've all got this existing infrastructure that we have to use, we have to maintain, and I know that's always the suck of being a sysadmin is like no matter how much cool stuff you're doing, you still got all that old stuff that you got to maintain. So
I think it's a good practice maybe because we do see the people always thinking about the cloud native and things because I want to clarify one thing is Argo CD is Kubernetes native. It's not cloud native because it's kind of like Kubernetes native to me sometimes is broader than cloud native. Why I'm saying that is even you have the on-prem VMs, you can still create a Kubernetes cluster locally. There are so many tutorials, so many tools out there to help you to create a cluster means you can still can using Argo CD to deploy it to manage it. There's nothing. It's not like you have to have a cloud Kubernetes cluster to do it. So Argo CD is Kubernetes native. So basically, you can taking the baby steps maybe from the on-prem VM to create a cluster using Argo CD to deploy, and later you got this flexibility. Either you want to go to the EKS or GKE, it's up to you.
yeah. Some good questions here. How hard to upgrade Argo versions from old to new, considering no impact on the environment?
Yeah. Basically, upgrades are just kubectl apply of the new manifest, and then hopefully you're using Argo CD to manage itself, and then and have it prune the old stuff. So it was always kind of intentional to stick to a declarative installation and upgrade process. So meaning not rely on kind of like a job process that kind of migrates stuff, from old to new. That migration code actually is typically baked into the code itself. So like when the new version starts up, it'll know to migrate the fields if there's an upgrade, and should be all transparent to the end users. So short answer is like there is no special upgrade procedure other than to apply the new manifest and possibly prune old resources that no longer exist. And Argo, if using Argo CD to manage itself, it should be obvious what needs to be pruned. I want to caution people this is why you want to use Argo CD to manage itself, because at one point we made a change to move from a deployment for the controller to a stateful set. And I ran into someone in KubeCon. It's like, hey, I am running into this problem where my application kind of flaps status, and we looked inside their namespace in Argo CD, and I saw both the controllers running, like
two different
stateful set, and they were basically kind of like fighting, and they were running with this actually with kind of no problem, but it's just kind of weird behavior. And if they were using RC to manage itself, they would realize that this deployment has gone away and we've moved to a stateful set. So,
yeah. And and a similar question might be, can I add new clusters to Argo CD declaratively?
Yes, it's a good question. So normal procedure is what we say is that we usually run Argo CD cluster add, and then but all that is really doing is it's creating a secret to represent a cluster under the cover. So if you want to do this declaratively, you basically have to construct that secret. And we do document what that secret should look like. It's essentially a kind of like a kube config type. We need like a bearer token. If you're using bearer token auth, but if you're using something like IAM auth, like you just need to specify the EKS like ARN or the cluster name. So it can be done declaratively.
Yeah, in fact, I'm sending people to this page because I reference it often. Because it's almost like, at least my learning journey for this product has been, you start with the overview, you do the core concept and getting started guide in their docs. They're great. Walks you through all the steps, and of course you have to have Kubernetes, but you're deploying it, and you've done all this sort of by hand at this point, right? And then you learn it, you play around, you maybe upload some YAML, copy and paste some YAML into the interface, but then you want, and my recommendation to everyone watching is you want to mature yourself to a declarative only, or as much declarative as you can get to, which doesn't only mean your applications are in YAML in a Git repo somewhere, but Argo itself and all of its config, and that's what these guys are talking about, is that Argo itself is leaning on Git repos and the YAML there for its own configuration. And they have this wonderful little chart that talks about all the different things. You may not need them all. If you're not, you don't need RBAC, you're not going to need to fill all these out. But you can start here and sort of mature as you go. And I've personally have found it to be relatively easy to just grow into it. And when I find that we have to go in the GUI and change a thing in the GUI or manage a certificate or whatever, that once I learn how to do it, then I go to the declarative side of it. I write the YAML, I put it in my Git, and then Argo is better. It's all things are better because I've now got the exact configuration. And if I wipe this thing out or need a new cluster, I don't have to start from scratch and try to remember how exactly I configured it last time. So
yeah, that's like the same process I do. Like I think it's like not just for Argo CD, but other things. Like I do everything, and then once you get this is perfect. Like I got it just the way I want it,
right?
And then let's go GitOps this, and then now you just need to do incremental changes, which are much more manageable in through a GitOps process and very controlled flow. But I think it's a very natural way of doing things.
I need a button so that once I do everything in the GUI and I'm like, okay, this is exactly what I've got it. This is exactly how I want it. Make my Git repo and put all these settings into the repo.
Yeah, it's been asked for like some kind of write back feature.
Yeah, write back. There's actually another company we had, not related to CD necessarily, but they look for drift in all of your YAML and your Terraform and all these other languages. And when they find the drift, they provide a automated PR process in their web app to put it back into your code, which I loved it because it's one thing to detect drift, it's another one to fix that drift. And Most tools that look for drift don't actually go all the way back to saying, yeah, we're going to write a PR for you, and here's the code on a new branch. And it was actually a pretty fancy feature, which, I kind of now ask that of every single tool on the show. This is kind of a repeated question saying, hey, if you have a web GUI, we're going to click buttons in it, put that back into Git, or whatever. So it's a bad habit. We humans have it. We just want to, we see that thing, we click it, it changes something, and we didn't track it. So it is a common problem. Well, we had more demos scheduled, but we were almost an hour and a half into this. So I'm going to call it and say, we need you back on the show. So maybe when Argo CD in the cloud comes out, maybe like around, after ArgoCon, almost said KubeCon. After ArgoCon, when there's more to talk about, you've got this more of these products as a service. I'll invite you guys back on if you're willing to show back up for another hour of questions, and then we can go through it all again, because I feel like there's still so much people can learn. Rollouts, we didn't get to do a demo of that. Understanding how they relate to each other, especially rollouts and CD, and when you maybe need rollouts. I love, by the way, your answer to the question of, wait to have a problem before you try to implement a solution, meaning don't deploy all 4 of these things at the same time just because they're products. You may not need that. I find rollouts as a maturity thing. Your first day in Kubernetes, right? Like you don't know you have that problem yet because you're probably still doing manual stuff. So rolling updates in Kubernetes is amazing if you've never had that kind of thing before.
Exactly.
But once you've done that for a year or two, maybe you want to graduate into something
even
fancy.
Within the rollout itself, there's even levels of maturity within rollouts itself. So like first you mature from, okay, rolling up update is great, but I actually really need Canary. Then you get into rollouts, and then rollouts is like, okay, I've got Canary, but I really want, automated boards and promotions based on metrics. And so that's like another level of maturity. And it took like literally years for Intuit to mature to that maturity itself, like getting developers on board and establishing measurable things in their application, whether it's business metrics or something. And it's like a big spectrum and progression.
Yeah, and it's great that you all came from they're relatively early days compared to the world of all these tooling. So it was actually pretty neat, I imagine, to get that stuff working on the ground and into it and saying like, we're kind of badass. I'm not bragging or anything, but we just did some stuff that like we're gonna have to talk about at KubeCon now because no one else is doing that yet. It's one of those things where it's always exciting to feel like you're on the leading edge of a new idea that everyone else is going to want to get a part of. So, well, congratulations again on another round of funding. I'm excited to see what new features and even new products, or the extensions idea. That's a pretty cool thing as well. I'm going to give Harish the last question here, very specific one before we have to wrap it up. But can we trigger monitoring alerts?
Good question. There is a project called an Argo CD notifications. It's an ecosystem project. You can install it in the same namespace that Argo CD is running in. And basically, the idea is that you can annotate either an application or a project with information that you want to notify. And then Argo CD notification supports things like Slack and PagerDuty and kind of just I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but that's the idea. Yes, you can notify other systems based on your application health, for example, if it degrades. And even like your own customized information about the application.
Yeah. All right. That's really cool. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're not all sitting there all day with the Argo CD console in front of us or website in front of us, right? So we do need to plug these kind of things into our systems as sure. Like Slack is like the thing, right? We're all, I think, at this point, growing weary of Slack. It's like it solved a major problem, and now it is the problem. But wherever you live, Teams, Discord, whatever, there's probably something out there, at least for some of these events. The way, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. The way you get a hold of these guys, we all have our Twitter handles here. Someone asked about how can we follow you. All the Twitter handles are below us. Links to the projects below. I will update this video with all of the links we talked about. And everyone sign up for the ArgoCon. We mentioned that earlier. It's over here. ArgoCon is in September. Are you going to do a virtual as well, or how's that going to work for people that can't make it to?
It has both virtual and physical. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. And then is there I guess obviously follow Acuity, and is Argo doesn't have its own Twitter account, right? So it's the company.
It has.
Oh, it does? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
For some reason I didn't look it up. And let's see what else. Oh, next week on the show we're gonna have we're gonna actually talk about something actually quite related to this. DORA metrics. We talked a lot about a couple of the metrics today, but DevOps metrics. We haven't actually had a whole show about that. So next week, Docker Captain Laura Taco is going to be on the show. One of my friends, everyone, if you've been here around long enough, she's on a couple times a year, and she's going to be here. And we're going to talk about beyond DORA metrics, just for the new space metrics, which I haven't really learned about yet. It's a little bit more beyond the DORA typical 4 metrics that everyone wants to talk about. So if you're not someone who's measuring your DevOps impact in your organization, definitely come back next week. We're going to have a lot of questions. It'll be a question-focused show for sure. And thank you so much, Hong and Jesse. You've both been great. I've learned so much today. I'm selfish. I just wanted you on this show so I could learn some more Argo stuff, so so I could go use it. And thank you all for watching the show. We're here every Thursday. We'll be back next week, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.